Rain lashed the canopy above, slicing through leaves like daggers and soaking the jungle floor below in thick, relentless sheets. The drops struck the ground in a steady rhythm, merciless, disorienting. Lieutenant Riley Moore crouched low in the underbrush, one gloved hand brushing the mud as she scanned the drenched terrain ahead. Her damp uniform clung to her skin, the stitched American flag on her shoulder darkened by moisture and grit. Behind her, the sound of awkward splashing and alien voices rose, echoing uncertainty. "Keep formation," she called over her shoulder, not for the first time. The alien cadets were struggling. Clad in mismatched, regulation-issue gear modified for various physiologies, they sloshed through the waterlogged undergrowth, their movements uncoordinated, their panic barely contained. A thin, blue-skinned figure flinched as thunder cracked overhead. It was Selner, a cadet from Virex 3, whose large, obsidian eyes darted around with visible anxiety. His species was adapted to deep space and sterile environments, not monsoon-soaked jungles crawling with unseen life. "This is not what I trained for," he muttered in a clicking dialect, the translator embedded in his collar rendering it in flat, mechanical English. Riley ignored the comment. Complaints wouldn't stop the storm, and neither would pity. They were 10 hours into a 24-hour joint survival drill, launched from the orbital cruiser Unity Dawn, and already cracks were forming. What was meant to be a cooperative training exercise had become a test of endurance and leadership. Up ahead, the trees thinned slightly, revealing a narrow clearing. Riley raised a fist, signaling the group to halt. Boots squelched to a stop. The rain pressed in heavier, and steam rose from the wet earth like breath from a wounded animal. Commander Zeldar stepped forward, tall and imposing, with charcoal skin marked by glowing bioluminescent lines. The official leader of the alien cadet unit, he towered over Riley, though his gaze often avoided hers. "This delay is unnecessary," he said coolly. "We've only covered 8 kilometers. At this rate, we won't reach the rendezvous before nightfall." "We'll be slower if someone breaks an ankle or gets lost," Riley replied, standing to meet his gaze. "Visibility's down to 20 meters. Let them catch their breath. They're not soldiers yet." Zeldar's jaw flexed, the ridges of his mandibles shifting. "They must become soldiers. That's the point." Riley didn't argue. There was no point. She turned instead to scan the tree line, eyes narrowed beneath rain-streaked lashes. The jungle wasn't just wet, it was alive. Birds cackled in alarm, creatures rustled high in the canopy, and in the distance, something large splashed in a way that made her uneasy. She tapped her wrist pad. The screen flickered, then went black. The comms were still down. A result of the electrical storm they'd passed through that morning, or perhaps interference from the dense foliage. Either way, they were cut off. Behind her, one of the younger cadets, a short, orange-scaled creature named Threk, let out a sudden yelp and dropped his gear. Riley turned sharply. "Leech," he whimpered, clawing at his leg. "It bit me." She rushed over and knelt. A thin, black parasite had indeed attached to the inside of his thigh, pulsing as it drank. With practiced efficiency, Riley drew her blade, slid it under the leech's body, and flicked it off in one smooth motion. "Next time," she said calmly, "don't wade into standing water without checking your path." Threk nodded, wide-eyed, and said nothing. The rain intensified. Leaves sagged under the weight. Somewhere to their left, a tree branch snapped and fell. Zeldar checked his directional reader and scowled. "The river is rising," he said. "We should be moving." "I know," Riley replied. She looked around the faces surrounding her. They were tired, untested, afraid. Some had never even set foot on a planet before. And now they were neck-deep in a rainforest with no working comms, barely functioning equipment, and one increasingly agitated superior. She pointed toward a thick root system that rose like a spine out of the ground. "We'll shelter there for 15 minutes, then push west. The map shows high ground half a click away." Zeldar said nothing, but the tension in his posture was enough. He disapproved, but he wouldn't challenge her outright, not yet. The group huddled under the roots, their breathing heavy and ragged. Riley moved among them, checking wounds, offering terse encouragement. She didn't sugarcoat their situation. She never had. That's why they sent her to lead missions like this. Because while she lacked the polish of an officer like Zeldar, she delivered results. When she reached Selner, she noticed his hands were shaking. "You all right?" He looked up, face wet with more than just rain. I don't belong here. None of us do, Riley said. But we're here anyway. So let's survive it. He nodded once, eyes searching hers for something he couldn't define. Trust, maybe. Permission to be afraid. She gave him neither. Only a quiet pat on the shoulder before moving on. Minutes passed. The rain didn't let up. Riley rose and glanced westward. Trees swayed under the downpour. Water pooled around their boots, rising slowly. She turned to Zeldar. If we don't move now, we'll be swimming. The alien commander hesitated, then nodded. Then lead. The word was small, almost grudging, but it was enough. They pushed forward into the rising waters, which now lapped at their knees. Roots and vines twisted beneath the surface, ready to trip the unwary. Riley took point, machete in hand, slashing through low-hanging branches. She kept her pace steady, slow enough for the smallest cadets to follow. Behind her, the group slogged forward. Tension simmered like heat beneath their skin. Riley could feel it. Not just fear, but something deeper. A fracture forming between two ways of thinking. Between hierarchy and instinct. Protocol and survival. A sudden shout broke the monotony. Cadet down. Riley spun. One of the taller cadets, Meran, from the aquatic colonies, was being dragged downstream by the current. He'd slipped or been caught in a sudden surge. Either way, his clawed hands were scrabbling for purchase on a root. Hold position, Riley shouted. She dropped her pack and dove into the water. It hit her like a wall, cold and fast and angry. She kicked against the pole, reached out, and caught Marin's arm just as his grip failed. They tumbled together, the current dragging them several meters before she slammed her boot into a submerged log and stopped their momentum. Grab the branch, she shouted. Marin hesitated, then obeyed. With effort, they scrambled to the bank. Riley heaved him up first, then hauled herself onto solid ground. She was soaked, breathless, and furious. Don't break formation, she snapped. You go under out here, and we may not find you. Marin lowered his head, ashamed. As she stood to rejoin the group, Riley saw something else, movement on the horizon. The trees bent unnaturally. The sound of the water changed, becoming deeper, more thunderous. She turned to Zeldar. We need to get to that ridge. Now. He didn't argue. For the first time, his voice held urgency. Move. They ascended toward the high ground, boots slapping against mud, water racing at their heels. Riley could feel it rising. The forest was about to flood. And still, they pushed on. By the time they reached the ridge, soaked and gasping, the river below had. The rain did not stop. Morning came, or what passed for it beneath the thick canopy, but the storm showed no intention of yielding. The downpour softened the jungle's edges, making everything shimmer in a haze of mist and motion. From their precarious perch on the ridge, Riley could see how the river had swollen into a lake, muddy and restless, stretching far into the distance. Trees bowed beneath the flood, their roots drowned, their leaves glistening like glass. They were stranded. Riley crouched beside a gnarled root, inspecting a sodden map. It was already starting to disintegrate at the corners, the ink bleeding into pale smudges. Beside her, Selner hunched beneath a leaf the size of his torso, shivering despite the relative warmth. His species didn't handle prolonged moisture well. His skin, normally smooth, had begun to crack in thin, spiderweb lines. I can't take much more of this, he whispered. You'll take what you have to, Riley said, her voice more gentle than the words. Behind them, the group was quiet, conserving energy, huddled in small clusters beneath makeshift coverings. Some had scavenged broad leaves or vines to create rudimentary shelters. Others simply sat in silence, their bodies pressed close for warmth. Fear had turned to fatigue. Even the panic had dulled to a gray sort of resignation. Zeldar paced at the ridge's edge, his long limbs moving with tension he could no longer hide. The alien commander had said little since their ascent. His eyes scanned the horizon with cold calculation, but Riley sensed the truth. He didn't have a plan either. She stood and approached him, boots squelching in mud that had the consistency of warm clay. We can't stay here. Zeldar didn't look at her. You suggest we swim? No, she said. I suggest we build. He turned then, a flicker of curiosity in his expression. With what? This ridge is rock and rot. Riley gestured behind them. The forest gives us what we need. Vines, branches, deadwood. If we can lash it together, we can float out. If we wait here, we're wasting time and losing people. Zeldar's expression darkened. We don't know what's in those waters. We know what's not up here. Supplies. Shelter. A way out. She paused. You said they need to become soldiers. Then let them build something worth surviving in. He studied her a moment longer. Then he nodded, slowly. Riley wasted no time. She gathered the group and spoke with firm clarity. We're building a raft. Maybe more than one. We'll break into teams. Strip vines, collect branches, anything that floats and isn't rotting. No one works alone. No one wanders. There was a pause. No one moved. Then Threx stepped forward, wiping grime from his brow. You really think it'll float? If it doesn't, Riley said, you can tell me I told you so on the way down. That earned a weak chuckle from a few cadets. The smallest sign of life. It was enough. The work began. At first, progress was slow. The cadets moved awkwardly, unfamiliar with tools or teamwork. Riley demonstrated how to twist vines for strength, how to test wood for buoyancy. She used her knife sparingly, careful not to dull it on wet bark. Zeldar helped organize the larger cadets to drag logs into place, his commanding tone still intact, though the edge of arrogance had dulled. Sweat mingled with rain. The air hung heavy with the scent of cut sap and crushed leaves. By midday, the first frame had taken shape, a crude but functional skeleton of crossed logs lashed together with sinewy vines. It creaked ominously, but held. Two more like this, Riley said, appraising the structure. We'll lash them side by side for stability. Time passed. Injuries came, scrapes, a twisted wrist, one cadet nearly crushed by a falling limb, but nothing fatal. The rhythm of building gave them purpose, something to focus on beyond fear. Selner worked beside Threk, his movements clumsy but determined. Riley watched as the two aliens, so physically different, learned to move in sync, one guiding the other with nods and brief murmurs. For all their differences, necessity was drawing them together. As evening approached, Zeldar approached Riley again. He stood in the fading light, his bioluminescent markings glowing dimly, the first real sign of fatigue she'd seen in him. You're a soldier, but you lead like a builder, he said. Riley arched a brow. Is that your version of a compliment? It's an observation, he replied. Leadership is often mistaken for command. What you've done, this, was not in the mission parameters. She looked out over the half-assembled rafts. Neither was flooding. He was quiet a moment. Then he said, if we fail, it will not be because of you. Riley didn't answer. There wasn't time for philosophy. The sun had begun to vanish, and with night came other dangers, predators, cold, and uncertainty. That night, they lit no fires. Smoke would attract attention they couldn't afford. Instead, they huddled again, exhausted but no longer hopeless. Riley sat at the edge of the ridge, staring out at the water. It had begun to recede slightly, revealing the tops of submerged trees. A good sign, maybe, or a brief lull before another rise. She heard footsteps and turned to see Selner approaching, his cloak wrapped tightly around him. Why do you help us? He asked. Riley tilted her head. Because you're on my team. You don't know us. I don't need to. You're scared. You're trying. That's enough. He sat beside her, silent for a time. Back home, he said finally, we don't build things like this. We replicate what we need. There's no struggle. Then this will be good for you, she said. Is that what humans believe? That pain is necessary. Not pain. Effort. She looked at him. This isn't just about survival. It's about proving we can survive together. He nodded slowly, the thought heavy in his eyes. Before dawn, the first raft was ready. It rested at the edge of the ridge, a patchwork of wood and vine, ugly but promising. Riley ran her hands along the bindings, testing the tension. It would hold. Maybe not forever, but long enough. She turned to the others, their faces lit by the blue-green glow of Zeldar's markings. Tomorrow, she said, we float. And this time, no one questioned her. The rain finally eased as dawn broke, casting a pale gold hue across the jungle canopy. Though the sky remained heavy with clouds, the torrential downpour had dwindled to a steady drizzle, and the river's aggressive current slowed, settling into a grim, wide expanse. The cadets gathered at the ridge, their makeshift raft creaking in the mud below, waiting for the signal. Tension radiated through the group like a taut wire. No one spoke, but their eyes said everything. Uncertainty, hope, fear. Riley stood at the edge, scanning their route. She had identified a narrow corridor where the water seemed calmer, the debris less threatening. If they were lucky, it would lead to higher ground. If not, the floodplain would devour them before they had a chance to pivot. "We'll split into 2 groups," she said. "Raft 1 leaves first. Raft 2 follows once we're clear. You stay in pairs. No exceptions." Zeldar joined her, eyes narrowed. "We'll go together." She nodded. "I'll take the helm. You manage the rear. Keep them balanced." Selner and Threk climbed onto the first raft, both visibly nervous. Threk gripped a long branch like a pole, his knuckles white, while Selner sat low, arms coiled tightly around his knees. Riley boarded last, pushing them off with a determined shove. The raft wobbled as it met the water, then steadied as the logs adjusted to the weight. Zeldar leapt aboard, silent and fluid, like a creature born to motion. They drifted. For the first few minutes, everything went better than expected. The raft moved with sluggish grace, gliding between submerged trunks and floating vines. Riley used her pole to steer, watching the currents with narrowed eyes. She didn't speak, focused entirely on maintaining their course. Behind her, the second raft launched without issue. For a heartbeat, she allowed herself to hope. Then came the whirlpool. It wasn't obvious at first. The water just twisted subtly, spiraling where it shouldn't. Riley noticed the shift in rhythm before she saw the eddy, a swirling maw pulling at the surface like a slow-motion drain. "Left," she shouted, jabbing her pole into the riverbed. Zeldar mirrored her movements from the rear, but the raft had already caught the outer edge of the current. It spun, tilting dangerously. Threk fell to his knees, bracing Selner with one hand, the other digging into the vines. "Hold it," Riley barked. "Use the poles. Push us out." The cadets obeyed, thrusting at the water with all their strength. It took precious seconds, too many, but the raft finally lurched free, slipping out of the whirlpool's grasp with a soggy groan. Everyone exhaled at once. "That's what we're dealing with," Riley muttered. "Stay alert." They continued downstream, warier now. The jungle around them loomed like a green cathedral, vines and roots draping over the water, hiding threats in shadow. Occasionally, alien birds cawed from the branches, their cries sharp and mechanical. No one dared respond. By midday, they had covered several kilometers. Riley estimated another hour before they'd reached the ridge marked on her crumbling map, a rocky outcrop that could offer safety and elevation. But as the sun crept higher, so did the temperature. The jungle steamed. The cadets began to wilt. Then the scream came. It wasn't human. Riley twisted to look back, just in time to see the second raft tilt violently. A dark shape had erupted from the water beside it, long and sinuous. A tentacle lashed out, wrapping around one of the cadets, yanking him from the raft into the water with a splash that echoed like thunder. "Damn it!" Zeldar shouted. "Defensive positions." Panic ignited. Riley didn't hesitate. She drove her pole deep and turned their raft toward the second one. As they approached, she caught glimpses of the creature, a slick, eel-like predator with 2 mini eyes and jaws that opened sideways. It circled beneath the water, barely visible. "Keep the raft steady," she ordered, pulling her knife. The cadets on the second raft scrambled to hold formation, fending off lashing limbs with poles, sticks, whatever they could find. Riley reached the edge and dove in. The water was warmer than she expected, murky, full of plant matter and silt. She swam hard, knife clenched between her teeth, heart thundering. Below her, shadows twisted. She found the cadet. He was alive, flailing, tangled in a mass of tendrils. Riley sliced at them with clean, powerful strokes, cutting through the alien muscle. The creature shrieked underwater, a sound she felt more than heard, and recoiled just enough for her to drag the cadet to the surface. Zeldar was already in the water, meeting her halfway. Together, they hauled the cadet back to the raft, gasping and slick with blood. The second creature didn't pursue. Not yet. Everyone on deck. Riley yelled, coughing. "We move." Now, no one questioned her. The rafts were lashed together with vines, the wounded cadet cradled between Threk and Selner. The jungle suddenly felt smaller, as if the very trees were listening. Watching, they paddled harder, fueled by terror and adrenaline. Riley didn't let herself stop to think. Survival was action. Motion. They would process the horror later. By the time they reached the ridge, dusk was falling. The land rose in a sharp incline from the floodplain, a natural fortress of stone and moss. The cadets scrambled up the slope, dragging the rafts behind them with ropes and bare hands. Riley collapsed to her knees at the summit, chest heaving. They'd made it. For now. Zeldar stood nearby, silent, watching the horizon with grim focus. Riley joined him, brushing wet hair from her face. "We lost one," he said. "I know. He'll live. Thanks to you." Riley shook her head. "Thanks to all of us. This isn't a one-person mission." He turned to her, his expression unreadable. "You could have left him." She met his gaze. "And taught the others what? That their lives only matter if they're convenient." He said nothing, but a flicker of something passed through his eyes. Respect, maybe, or understanding. The cadets set up camp atop the ridge. It wasn't much, some dry ground, a few scattered stones, but it was safety. They shared water, tended wounds, and, for the first time since the flood, spoke freely. Laughter even surfaced in a few corners, brief but real. Riley sat with Selner and Threk near a flickering glowstone taken from a supply pouch. The two aliens leaned against one another, half asleep, their bond strengthened by shared survival. She looked up at the stars beginning to pierce the clouds above. Their mission had been derailed. The terrain was unforgiving. Danger lingered in every shadow. But for the first time, they weren't just cadets. They were a unit. And the real journey was only beginning. The jungle was quieter now, but it was not peace that filled the silence. It was anticipation. The storm had passed, leaving behind an uneasy calm. The flooded lowlands glistened in the morning sun, deceptive in their beauty, while birds returned to their perches with watchful eyes and broken songs. From the stone ridge, Riley surveyed the terrain, calculating the next step, already aware that they were far from safety. Their group had dwindled. One cadet lay feverish beneath a makeshift tarp, recovering slowly from the wounds dealt by the river beast. Another limped, using a snapped branch as a crutch. Supplies were dwindling. Morale flickered like a candle threatened by wind. But no one had broken, not yet. Riley paced beside Zeldar, who knelt at a spread of salvaged equipment, adjusting the few functioning navigation beacons they still had. The alien commander had not slept. Neither had she. Sleep invited vulnerability, and neither of them could afford it. "We're being followed," he said without turning. Riley blinked. "You're sure? The pattern's too precise. Each time we stop, I hear movement. Always distant, always circling, never approaching. It's observation." She considered this. Another creature? Zeldar shook his head. "No animal watches with patience. This is intelligence." The words settled between them like frost. Riley crouched beside him and studied the beacon display, still flickering, still unstable. "We'll move at night," she said. "Minimal light, quiet travel. We'll head toward the stone formation marked on the map. That's our only high ground until we reach the uplands." He nodded. "I'll inform the cadets." They set out as dusk fell, wrapping their feet and tools to muffle the sound. The jungle had begun to dry, the undergrowth crunching faintly beneath their steps. Vines dangled like nooses, slick with condensation. Their path was narrow, cut between ferns and fallen trunks, each step measured. Selner clung to Threk's side, his eyes scanning the trees with fevered tension. The events on the water had left their mark. He spoke less now, and when he did, his voice had lost its usual warmth. Threk didn't press him. He had grown into a quiet protector, his massive form always between Selner and any potential threat. They reached the stone formation just before midnight. It jutted from the earth like a jagged tooth, ancient and laced with moss. Riley ordered them to set a perimeter. Zeldar paced its base, mapping escape routes and noting defensible angles. It was only then that they saw the lights. Small, faint, blue pulses gliding through the trees in perfect symmetry. Riley raised a fist, signaling silence. The cadets dropped into crouches, eyes wide. The lights drifted closer, weaving between trunks, casting ethereal glows on bark and leaf. Then came the sound, a distant hum, harmonic and metallic. It sent a ripple through her spine. Not a creature, a machine. Riley motioned for Zeldar. "Recon drone." He squinted. "Not one of ours." She exhaled slowly. "So we were right." The lights vanished as quickly as they'd appeared, swallowed by the jungle. The hum faded. But the message had been delivered. "We're not alone," Zeldar said. "No," Riley agreed. "And we're being tested." The next morning, they found the remains. Less than a kilometer from their camp, a patch of undergrowth had been flattened. Blood stained the leaves, and something charred and metallic lay among the ferns, a piece of armor, not theirs. Burned, twisted, and eerily clean, as though picked from the bones it once shielded. Riley stared at it. "That's recent." Zeldar didn't reply. He studied the area, brow furrowed. "We keep moving," she said. "We stay ahead." They traveled west, navigating ravines and twisted groves, passing through ancient ruins half consumed by nature. The cadets moved in tight formation now, wordless, driven. Even Selner found strength in the silence. But then the jungle opened. They stepped into a clearing so sudden, so vast, it felt unnatural. The trees ended in a perfect circle, the ground smoothed by forces unknown. In the center stood a structure, low, domed, metallic. Its surface shimmered like mercury, undisturbed by time. "Is that?" Threk began, but his voice trailed off. "Not listed on any map," Zeldar murmured. Riley stepped forward. "It's a testing site." The cadets followed cautiously. As they approached the structure, the air changed. It vibrated faintly, like a low hum pressing against their skulls. The entrance yawned open. No lock, no barrier, only shadow. Against better judgment, they entered. Inside, the temperature dropped. The walls were smooth, unmarred by tools. Lights blinked along the floor, reacting to their presence. A hallway led deeper into the structure, lined with panels depicting stars, constellations, and other species. Familiar and not. Human and alien. "This isn't just a station," Riley said quietly. "It's a record." They reached the main chamber, a vast sphere with a translucent ceiling that displayed a simulated sky. A console pulsed in the center, low and inviting. Selner approached it, hesitating. "Should we?" he asked. "No," Zeldar said. "But we must." Selner placed a hand on the console. It responded immediately. The chamber came alive with projections, holograms of battles, floods, famines. Images of cadets from other missions, some failing, some succeeding. Each scenario ended with the same phrase in dozens of languages. "Adaptation is survival." Then a final image flickered to life. It was them, Riley, Zeldar, Selner, Threk, the remaining cadets. Caught mid-step in the jungle, caught in stills of panic, effort, unity. They watched themselves. And then the display went dark. Silence held the room. No one spoke. Riley stepped forward, her voice quiet. "We were never just trainees. This whole planet is the test. The flood, the creatures, even the machines." Zeldar looked to her. "And we're the data." "More than that," she said. "We're the solution they're hoping to find." A soft tone sounded. The ceiling parted. Above, a ship descended, sleek, unfamiliar. Not from their world. Not part of their command. It hovered above the clearing, lights scanning the structure. Then, without words or signals, it opened its hatch. An invitation. Riley looked at the cadets. They waited on her choice. She glanced at Zeldar. "We go together." He nodded. And one by one, they stepped into the light.